You Don't Know Flack. You Don't Know Flack.
Welcome to You Don't Know Flack, a podcast full of stories about retro gaming, retro computing, video games, arcade games, and technology from a guy who was there and still is. My name is Rob O'Hara, but for the next 30 minutes, you can call me Flack.
Episode 3. Arcades.
Hello, and welcome to episode number 3 of You Don't Know Flack. This is episode 103, titled Arcades. And I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in once again. I know episode 2 was all about Dungeons and Dragons, which was kind of strayed from what the original idea of the podcast was. So thanks for bearing with me, and thanks for coming back for episode 3. This episode is being recorded on April 4th, which is 3 days after its scheduled release date. But the other one had a lot of clipping. I had some microphone problems, and I've since smashed the old microphone. So we have an all-new microphone and whole new setup here. So here we are. We're ready for episode 103. We're ready. I'm ready. Are you ready? That makes us ready. We're ready. And so episode 103 is all about arcades. I'm going to be talking about some of the old arcades that I used to hang out in as a kid and a young teenager. And the last probably third of the show is going to be some funny stories that took place in arcades. And I'm going to have to kind of move quickly through things to keep my scheduled 30-minute time limit per show. So I'm going to go ahead and get started today with episode 103. The first arcade game I have a specific memory of playing is Donkey Kong. There was a pizza place just outside, not too far from our house, called Shotgun Sam's. And this pizza place had a jukebox in the back. So every time my family would go eat dinner there, my mom would give me some quarters and my sister, and we would go back and play some songs on the jukebox or whatever. And so I remember this was probably late 1981, possibly early 1982, but right in that time frame. We had gone to eat at Shotgun Sam's, and my mom had given us some quarters to go back and play some songs in the jukebox like she always did. And when we went back there, I remember seeing 2 arcade games. There was one surrounding the jukebox. One was Donkey Kong, and the other one was Make Tracks. And the reason I remember that is because both games were in red cabinets. Now, if you don't know, Donkey Kong was originally created by Nintendo to fill radar scope cabinets, which was a previous Nintendo game that sold not so well in America. And they were the same shape as all the Nintendo cabinets, but they had red on them. And so the first 2,000 Donkey Kong cabinets were red instead of the blue that most people are familiar with. So, and Make Tracks is also a red cabinet. So I remember seeing these 2 red cabinets surrounding this jukebox. And so instead of putting my money into the jukebox, I put my quarter into Donkey Kong. And I remember playing it and just absolutely falling in love with it. And maybe not necessarily the game itself wasn't what I fell in love with as much as the idea. In 1981, we were going from, the early days of computers. Maybe, I don't even think we didn't have our Apple yet, so we're still, and maybe we had the Apple right around then. But, basically we're comparing arcade games to text adventures and games with, ASCII graphics or very, very basic block graphics. And now all of a sudden, in Donkey Kong, you have this. Even the early Atari games, Combat, Air Sea Battle, those type of things are really blocky type graphics, So to see Donkey Kong and a guy that was made up of multiple colors and this, this little sprite that actually looked like a guy, it was awesome, And so like I said, I got hooked, and lots of kids across America got hooked around that same time. Of course, in 81, 82, you're talking about pretty much the golden age of classic games. And, you got your your Donkey Kong, Pac-Man, Centipede, that, Defender, that era right there. So these games that, are all considered classics now were coming out then. And so when each game came out, it just won over more people. Everybody, it became more, a hobby or a pastime that people wanted to do. And so not only were all these kids getting hooked on this, but also businesses started getting hooked on arcade games, because even if you weren't, there were, at this time, there were no big arcades around here yet, but even if you were, any kind of business, you could put an arcade game in your business and kids would come there and spend money. So it was like, if you made this investment on an arcade machine, it would pay itself off and then some, so businesses really saw arcade games as this thing they could invest in, So when I think about old arcades that I used to go to, places that I used to play arcade games in, there are really, I've kind of divided them up into three categories, and I call them one-offs, co-located arcades, and then standalone arcades. And I'm going to give you some examples of each one of these, but I want you to keep this in mind. I grew up in a town called Yukon, Oklahoma, which is a small suburb of Oklahoma City. It's just west of Oklahoma City. And the town of Yukon is about 15 square miles. Actually, Wikipedia, I looked it up. Wikipedia says that it's about 25 square miles, but that includes, a lot of outlying land that's not, where there's, farmland or whatever. So, you have this city that's 3 miles by 5 miles. First of all, you have these, what I call one-off arcades, which are, they're not arcades. They're places like laundromats, restaurants, convenience stores, grocery stores, any place like that where you wouldn't generally think of being an arcade, but these were places that would put in one or two machines, just to make a little bit of money. Like Snyder's, which was a local grocery store. Snyder's had Zookeeper and Moon Patrol, and it's set up right by the exit. So, when you would come in, the parents could just drop your kids off by the front of the store, and we would hang out up there and play arcade games. The laundromat that's right by there used to have, actually they still have, a Miss Pac-Man and a pinball machine up front. The convenience store by my house, restaurants, would have one or two type games. They wouldn't have like what you think of now, like when I think of Pizza Hut or places like that have a little alcove with a little game room. It wasn't like that. It would just be like one or two games when you walked in standing there, But any place like that could afford to buy a game would put one in just to, draw customers and draw a little bit of extra money in. So that's one-offs. That's what I call one-offs. And then the second type of arcade I call co-located arcades. And two examples of this in Yukon are the bowling alley and the skating rink. So these are places that may have, 10 games, something in that kind of range. The bowling alley had pool tables and arcade games there and stuff. So by being co-located, like my friend Jeff and I, we did actually go to these places just to play the games. But, it would be, they're kind of piggybacking on, like at the skating rink. Most kids would go to the skating rink to skate, and then they would also play video games. So there were the co-located, that kind of came next in my memory. And then on the tails of that, you have the actual full-size standalone arcades. Now, again, remember that I said Yukon is 3 miles by 5 miles. And by 1985, maybe 86, in the mid-80s right there are 3 standalone arcades in Yukon. The first one that I remember was called Starbucks, which actually has nothing to do with the coffee company. It was actually named after Starbuck from Battlestar Galactica. So you had Starbucks, and then there were 2 other arcades, and I've asked friends of mine, and nobody can come up with the name of what these places were. There was one on Vandament, which was just a couple of blocks down from the mid-high, and then there was a third one that came in over kind of by the bowling alley, which was, like I said, kind of weird because the bowling alley had their own arcade inside. And one thing that's interesting about people who hung out in arcades and old arcade type guys is that anytime I see a machine, I can tell you where I first saw it. And it's like I have these memories associated with every machine. Like when I see a crossbow machine, the first thing I think of is that I used to play crossbow at the skating rink. It was kind of funny because Crossbow, you probably know, is a shooting type game where there's a crossbow mounted on the front of the machine, and you have to shoot away dangers that are attacking your little party of people. But the thing is as a sixth grader or seventh grader, I was really too short to play crossbow because you have to see up, over the gun and everything. But at the skating rink, I was tall enough because I was wearing roller skates. So, that's where I could play crossbow. It's the first place I saw it. And I still have this memory of trying to lean forward to, look over the gun and shoot. And the harder I would lean forward, the more my feet would roll backwards because I was on roller skates. So, the games that I still have fond memories of, like track and field. When I see a track and field, I think of the convenience store that was right outside my neighborhood. And my friends and I would ride our bikes up there during the summer and go to track and field and take our pencils or our combs or whatever we would use, to hit the buttons faster. I just the other day I saw for sale a Commando arcade machine. And when I saw it in 7th grade, I went on a field trip to Washington, D.C., and as part of the field trip, they took our group to a mall, and they gave us like $5 to spend at the mall, like in the little food court where we could go get something to eat and a drink or whatever. And I took it and I went and got quarters, and I went to the little arcade that they had there, and I saw Commando. That was the first place I ever saw Commando. And I, spent $5 on it there while everybody else ate. So those are the kind of things. It's funny. Like when I said that there were 3 standalone arcades in Yukon, and there's the one on Vandermont. Nobody calls it the one on Vandermont. Everybody calls it the one that had 720. It was the only arcade in Yukon that had 720. And when it came out, actually they had side by side 720 and Paperboy. So not only when I see those games, I think of that place, but also, that's how that place is remembered. It's nobody remembers its name, but everybody remembers that it was the place with 720. Likewise, the one that was over by the bowling alley, it was actually, this is kind of a neat story. My buddy Jeff, he was one of my best friends in high school. He's still a good friend of mine today. Jeff's parents' friends opened up an arcade, and this was the third arcade that I mentioned that's over by the bowling alley. And the weekend before they opened, his parents contacted, the people that were opening it contacted Jeff through his parents, and Jeff contacted me. And the people, the owners, wanted to hire Jeff and I to come test the arcade. And so the deal was we would have to, this was what we were being forced to do. We were forced to play every game in the arcade and then give our feedback. So we had to tell them, what joysticks weren't working, or, if any buttons were sticky, and what we thought of different games. They had some newer games, some older games. We had to give our input or whatever. So we spent a Saturday doing that. It was really fun. One of the funny things was they had Golden Axe and Double Dragon, which are 2 of probably 3 or 4 games I've ever beaten in my life. But it just as a coincidence, they had both of those games. So the idea was that we were supposed to go around, put a quarter in each machine, and play it and tell them what we thought and then move on. And when we got to Double Dragon, that's probably Double Dragon and Golden Axe are, I think, the only 2 games I've ever beaten on 1 quarter. So, here I am going on for half an hour, and they're just kind of standing around, trying to nudge me. Okay, we get it, game works. Let's move on, kid. So anyway, but the point of that is, when you see machines, mentally, they're related, to these locations. So you have all these arcades here in Yukon in this small little area, and they're trying to compete not only amongst each other, but they're also trying to compete with the arcades that are springing up in Oklahoma City. You have Cactus Jack's, which is just 2 or 3 miles outside of Yukon, right in the west side of Oklahoma City. And then another big one was Le Mans, which was in Crossroads Mall. Actually, there were 4 or 5 malls in Oklahoma City, and all of them had arcades. The Heritage Park Mall had Starcade, which actually closed down just about 2 years ago. They had a big auction. I bought a couple games from it. There was Le Mans. There was Malibu Grand Prix, which was right by Crossroads, and it was one of those. If you never saw Malibu, it was one of those places. I think they still have them in some places that are go-karts combined with a big arcade. Of course, Oklahoma City, these arcades are going to be even bigger and draw even more kids. So, all of a sudden, I mean, go back to 1981, the first memory I have of playing an arcade game. Now, 4 years later, there are dozens of arcades to choose from. So it really sprung up. To me, it seems like it was almost overnight, or, within a really short period of time. One thing people ask me about is, what were these arcades like? Like, it's funny, when you see TV shows or something and they have an arcade and you wonder, was it really like that or something? And the only thing I could say, I mean, there are stereotypes and things that all these arcades had in common, but arcades were really, each one was so different. And not just because the games they had inside or the decorations, but just the whole feel of it. And so I'm going to compare two different arcades, Le Mans versus Cactus Jack's. And this is talking, around that heyday, the mid-'80s. First of all, in Le Mans was in Crossroads Mall and still there. Actually, both these arcades are still open. They've changed dramatically over the years, but and now it's Bally. Bally Le Mans was kind of like the showcase arcade. It was in the biggest mall, and when you walked in, there were always brand new games right up front, and big lights like "Now Playing," a big sign that says "Now Playing," and there were flashing lights around it. They had almost like casino style carpet, like really dark red carpet with patterns in it, and then the walkways were lined with like a movie theater, lit up with little moving light bulbs and stuff like that. And then it's actually 3 levels. The arcade is 3 levels. There's a lower level to the left, which had skee ball machines and maybe some kiddie type games, but no ticket stuff back then. It's all games. And then the middle area was divided. In the front was all the new stuff, and then kind of regular stuff in the middle, and then there was a third area off to the right, which was all the regular, like after things weren't hot anymore or new, then they would move them up to that area. And there was a couple of air hockey tables up in that area. And then right in the middle, just behind where the new games were, was a big video jukebox. It's the first one I can actually remember seeing where you put money in, but it would play music videos, and there were a couple of big screens. And it would play videos of stuff like Madonna and Michael Jackson and Cyndi Lauper, whoever's popular on the radio, that sort of thing, Le Mans is the first place I ever remember seeing Dragon's Lair. And they had the deluxe Dragon's Lair with a second monitor on top because people would crowd around, to see this game. So it was that type of arcade. It was the first place I ever saw Time Traveler, the hologram arcade game. I mean, so it's that type of arcade. Brand new games, everything's nice, it's well lit, popular. That was Le Mans. Now, Cactus Jack's, which is about 3 miles from my house. First of all, I don't know that you could ever give any game your full attention at Cactus Jack's because I was always afraid of being abducted. My main memory of Cactus Jack's was that it was dark. It had huge windows in the front of the arcade that had been painted black on the inside. So no light came in, and there were no lights inside either. The only lights that I remember were from the actual arcade games themselves. The floor was concrete, and the ceiling, and it's still like this today, is this funky conglomeration of pipes and machinery and ducting that looks like something out of the Terminator, maybe. And then it's all been spray coated with some sort of spray on insulation that, as kids, we always used to kid about it, being asbestos. And now we just assume it's asbestos. We're just not kidding about it anymore. And then in the back of Cactus Jack's, there's like a small break area with a snack vending machine, and then there was a cigarette machine, a Coke machine, and a cigarette machine. And someone has told me I'm wrong, but I swear I remember this. I swear that I remember that the cigarette machine took tokens, which makes it kind of weird. And it's even creepier than having just a cigarette machine back there for kids. But Cactus Jack's is still there. Of course, like everything, it's changed. It's much more family friendly these days. One thing I remember about Cactus Jack's, and the bathroom, it actually still looks like this. But instead of having normal urinals in the guy's bathroom, it has this giant trough that looks like a bathtub where you're just supposed to stand around, with other guys and pee in this thing. And then there's no tile or anything on the back, but I remember there was always a marquee, like an arcade marquee that was there. So it was just a bunch of guys peeing in a bathtub with a piss-soaked marquee behind it, and the bathroom still looks exactly like that. I don't know if there's a marquee there anymore, but it's just a big tub thing that you pee in. So, and like I said, both of those arcades are still open. They have changed greatly over the years. They're both much more. Well, Cactus Jack's is more family oriented now. They have parties. You can schedule Cactus Jack's for a party, or you can just go in. And probably a third of Cactus Jack's games have been removed and replaced with ticket redemption machines. And that's something that has happened at every arcade, really. It's not just Cactus Jack's. Ticket redemption, if you talk to arcade owners today, I've talked to several arcade owners, and I had one tell me that probably 90% of his income came from ticket redemption, and the other 10% came from the machine. So that's the necessary evil that keeps arcades going today. Or the arcades that are left are, they're either co-located with something big. I mean, if you think of Chuck E. Cheese or something like that, their arcade games are not there to make the money. Obviously, a $30 pizza and a pitcher of Coke is what's paying the bills. And the arcade games are just something fun, for the kids to do. And for the places that don't have big draws like that, they're making their money off of ticket redemption. So, like I said, necessary evil is the term that comes to mind. That's what's paying the bills and what's keeping people coming in. So, but anyway, when I think back about arcades, that's kind of what I think. And it's funny that I have this memory. When people say, what was it really like? And those, I always think about the movie Tron. There's that scene at the beginning of Tron where Flynn is about to, get the high score, and he's going to shoot down the recognizer. And, people are just crowding around and cheering him on and, go Flynn, that sort of thing. And it wasn't quite that dramatic, but it was similar, when somebody was going to beat a high score, I can remember people crowding around and watching somebody play who was really good at a game. And, like I said earlier, I used to play Gauntlet at Crossroads Mall, and I can remember my friends and I standing around and playing Gauntlet and having other people around us telling us, oh, go that way, or go get the food, or, oh, I know how to do this, that sort of thing. So it was more of an interactive type environment, I think. Like I said, that movie, or the scene from Tron, and, there's the scene from The Last Starfighter, which, it's a ridiculous scene. But, the protagonist, Alex, he's playing The Last Starfighter, and, he's in this trailer park, and, he's doing really good, and he starts getting the high score, and everybody's asleep in the trailer park, and then I think it's the maintenance guy comes out and shouts, Alex is going for the record, and people start coming out of their homes, and they're crowding up to watch the guy play the arcade game. I don't remember waking anybody up actually to come to an arcade and watch me play, but it's just that idea. It's that same type of feeling of people that you don't know just gathering around, and that was your moment to shine. If you were really good at an arcade game, I can remember the first time I beat Golden Axe, that people were standing around like, wow, watching and so like I said, it maybe it's not as dramatic as, I never had anyone come out of their trailer and watch me play a game, but and when I think about playing Golden Axe and beating Golden Axe, like I was just talking about, it makes me think about the memories that are associated with games. And I bought a Golden Axe machine. It doesn't work right now, but when I saw it, I knew that I wanted to own it. and not necessarily because I even like Golden Axe that much, but I have that memory of beating Golden Axe and people standing around me, and so when you buy arcade games, it's kind of like you're locking in those memories. Like when, if I play Golden Axe on an emulator, I'm just playing the game, but when I stand there in front of the actual machine, those memories do come back, and you think about those times and who you played those games with and stuff like that. And so that's probably one of the main reasons why people like me collect arcade games. For those of you that don't know, I own currently right at 30 arcade games. I have a building in my backyard that's full of arcade games that I go out and play from time to time. And the reasons not to collect arcade games are much, much longer than the reasons to collect arcade games. In fact, I'm finishing up work on Invading Spaces, my second book. It'll probably be out. I'm shooting for sometime this summer, and part of the first chapter, Invading Spaces is all about buying, selling, fixing up arcade games. It's about the whole hobby in general, and I think if people are picking up that book as an inspiration to collect arcade games, one of the things that I do in the first chapter is give you every reason why you should never get into the hobby of collecting arcade games. And I'm just going off the top of my head here, but some of the reasons I gave, number one is that obviously they take up a lot of space. So, an arcade game is somewhere between 2.5 and 3 foot wide and deep. They're about 6 foot tall. So, just one is making a commitment, to this space. And then 30, by the time you have several, you're dedicating a room or a garage, something like that. When you have 30, you're dedicating a building at that point. So, space is a reason. There are all kinds of logistics to not only buying and selling, but moving these things is a pain in the ass. You have to have a truck, a trailer, a dolly, tie-down straps, tarps, friends that like arcade games, so they will help you move arcade games. Thank you to everyone who's ever helped me move an arcade game. There's tons and tons of reasons. Another reason is when you buy games in the price range that I buy games, you had better learn how to work on them, or you had better be prepared to pay people to work on your games. We're talking about machines now that are 20, 30 years old, and a lot of them weren't built to last that long. So there are common repairs, there are expensive repairs, delicate, all these different types of things. And that's one thing that I want to get the word out early, that Invading Spaces is not a technical repair manual. In it, I'm going to, I have a chapter about troubleshooting and basic repairs, that sort of stuff, but I'm not going to get into a lot of the details, like, technically how to do, specific install cap kits, let's say. I mean, I'm going to tell you, what a problem is, how to diagnose it, and then, move on from there. But it's not a technical type book. It's more of a, beginner's guide to the hobby in general, and kind of an overview of everything. So, and then, the biggest reason not to collect arcade games is that you can play them all for free on your computer with MAME. And I'm guessing at this point, everybody listening to this podcast knows what MAME is. MAME stands for Multi-Arcade Machine Emulator, and it is a free program available for PCs, Macs, and it's been ported to lots and lots of different types of handheld machines and consoles and everything else that emulates the hardware needed to play arcade games. And so you can download any game you want in ROM format, essentially any game that you want, and play them for free on your computer. So you have to weigh, like I have a Golden Axe machine that doesn't work, that I paid money for, that's taking up this huge amount of space, that was heavy, that I had to move here. And so when you start looking at that versus I could be playing it for free on my computer, you really have to kind of weigh, the ins and outs of collecting. But anyway, okay, I'm kind of jumping topics here for a minute, but one thing that always comes up when you talk about arcades, and really this is about anything that has to do with retro. I had to deal with this topic when writing Commodore, and I don't know that I handled it great, but the question, like with Commodore, you say the whole point of Commodore was, I love the old days. I love playing on a Commodore. I love BBSs. I loved old modems. why did it go away then? If it was such a great thing, then what happened to it? And I could talk about that for, hours. But you have the same question with arcades. If arcades were such this great thing, they were so neat, they're so cool. Everybody that looks arcades, all these people are interested in arcades. Well, what happened to them? Why did most of them close down? And there are, lots of different theories. Everybody has their own theory, and it was a combination. All these theories are probably, there's some truth in all of them. There's about 4 reasons that I kind of stick with when I talk about why arcades close down. And these are, everything is opinion when you talk about this. But the number one reason why arcades closed down is because home video game consoles got better. In the early days, like I said, in 1981, when I'm playing Donkey Kong, and you compare that to, a TRS-80, what that can do, or, an Atari 2600, look at Donkey Kong on the Atari versus Donkey Kong, in the arcade, or look at Pac-Man on the Atari versus the arcade version. And there's no question, there's no comparison. The arcade versions are so much better. But as consoles, they get good in the 8-bit range. But when you're up to 16-bit, when you're looking at Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, they're not indistinguishable from the arcade, but they're really good. If you look at some of Mortal Kombat, they're pretty close. They're not exact, but they're close enough, especially for kids. They're pretty close. So once the consoles continue to get better, they're really giving arcades a run for their money. Now, the second reason why arcades closed is because you have this evolution of game types. Now, on the PC, in the early 80s, and even before that, but especially in the early 80s, PCs could not directly compete with arcades, and they weren't designed to. But what PCs could offer was longer type games, and so out of this, you get RPGs, or role-playing games, because arcades could not provide that, and they weren't designed to provide that. Arcades were designed to take your money. They were designed to give you a lot of action and kill you in about 2 minutes. And so, on home computers and role-playing games, you all of a sudden you have these games that took, days or weeks or months to complete. And that was, a gaming experience that you could not get in the arcade. And so as that type of game grew more and more popular and people wanted longer games and wanted to invest more time in games, that's something that drew gamers out of arcades and into home gaming. Now, a third reason that I talk about in the book and here about why arcades closed down is this cultural change that we go through starting in the 80s and going through to the 90s and even today. Everybody, who's my age in the 30s, I'm 34, but everybody who's in their 30s will tell you, when I was growing up, things were different. I'm sure your parents will tell you the same thing, but hopefully your parents aren't in your 30s. That's going to make me feel really old. So, as a kid, there's a million things I could say. I was allowed to ride my bike in a town, and now I would never let my son do that. Or, my parents, classic story. My mom used to go shopping at the local fabric store, and she would take my sister and me, and she would, we would beg her to let us stay in the car. And, so she would let us stay in the car by ourselves. And I'm sure I wasn't more than 10 years old. My sister's 3 years younger than that. And so, I'm sure we were much younger than that. And I remember, her giving us advice that we should roll down the windows if we got so hot that we thought we were going to pass out. But then if strangers came by, we should roll up the windows. So basically my sister and I would each, man a window. And then we were just constantly rolling the, anytime we got faint, we would roll the window down. And then when scary people came, we would roll the window up. And that's things that, now that gets you thrown in jail. DHS comes and takes your kids away. So, it's definitely a different type, it's a different era. That's all I can really say. And, in the 80s, it was acceptable to go to the mall and drop your kids off at the arcade and come back in an hour and pick them up. Or, you would let your kids go to the arcade and hang out for a couple hours. And, parents really don't do that. So arcades they lost their clientele. Just with society and the way that society has changed. And then the fourth reason is simple. The fourth reason is the internet. And, it's hard to say that the internet caused the death of arcades because they were already dying by the time that in the mid 90s, late 90s when internet really started, being popular. But, you have this need that arcades met of gaming with other people, going and seeing other people and the whole competition aspect. And if there was any chance of arcades coming back, I think the internet has really killed it as far as, a mass thing, big public acceptance of arcades because now kids can play games with one another, and I say kids, I do it all the time, but you can play games from your own home, and so there's no reason to get in your car and drive somewhere and go, try and kick someone's butt at Mortal Kombat when you can play it online and play other people. So, but those are the four things: the improvement of consoles, the change in taste of games like role-playing games, and then the change in culture, and then finally the internet. Those are the four things really that I put on the reasons arcade died. If you think of other reasons, email me at robohara@robohara.com because I'd like to include as much as I can in the book. But so anyway, I'm over my limit already, but I have several funny stories about arcade games, and so I want to get into those real quick. And the first story is called The Shocker. The first story is called The Shocker. It didn't have a name until just now, but now it has a name. The name is The Shocker. So in Oklahoma City, there is a place called Whitewater Bay, which is a big water park. It's actually owned by Six Flags now, but it used to be locally owned. And when you go into, I remember, going as a kid, and they had what I would call probably a makeshift arcade. I mean, it was like an outdoor arcade that had a tent erected over it. So there were no walls. It was just this tent, with arcade games in it. And they probably had 20 or so games. But in the far back corner of this was Battle Zone. And my buddy Justin and I had gone to this arcade, or we had gone to Whitewater, and we got tired of swimming. So we decided we're going to go play some arcade games. And so I go in there to play Battle Zone. And I grab the controls and I rest my forearm. That Battle Zone is a old tank driving game, and so it has these tank controls, these two joysticks, And I grab the joysticks and I rest my forearms on the panel, and this game shocks the crap out of me. There's like this, like a bolt, like a metal bolt holding the control panel in place. And when I laid my arm across it, this game really shocked me. And then I did the same thing that you always do when you eat, you take a bite of some food and it's terrible, and then, you immediately turn to someone and you're like, hey, try this, because you want them to experience the substitute of whatever you just experienced. So anyway, I called Justin and I'm like, hey, come over here, try this. And so he gets it and he leans up on the machine. He's like, holy crap, that just shocked me. I'm like, I know. Isn't that awesome? So anyway, we both think this is pretty funny. And so we find this younger kid, he's 2 or 3 years younger than us. And so we tell him, come here. We want to show you something. And so he comes over there and we're like, listen, if you grab this thing and you touch the steel, it will shock you, but it'll give you a free credit. And free credits are like gold, during this time. I mean, that's the holy grail. If you could get free credits on a game, So the kid does it, and he shocks himself. And I mean, this isn't a shock like static electricity, like when you shuffle your feet through your house and you touch something, it shocks you. It's not like that at all. This is like putting a 9-volt battery on your tongue, except for it's your entire arm. And so we get this kid to do it, and he's like, he screams, and we're like, oh man, there's no credit. And then I say, but you know what? I think I was holding down this button, the start button when I did it. So if you try that, I bet you'll get a free game. And so he does it again, and he shocks himself really bad. And then I'm like, God, maybe we were holding down both buttons. I know. So it became this game to just see how many times we could get this kid to shock himself. And at the time, I think we probably thought that this game was shocking people because it had something to do with the water, because we were at the water park. But looking back, I mean, if this was an outdoor arcade, there were probably 2 or 3 extension cords, and all these things were hooked into power strips into an extension cord or something. So I'm guessing something wasn't grounded properly somewhere. But anyway, that was the shocking Battle Zone. And a second story I wanted to tell you about is about my Karate Champ machine. Now, I always liked Karate Champ. I told you earlier about associating games with places. My bowling alley had Karate Champ, and I'm assuming people know this now, but when you played arcade games, especially if it was a popular game, you could reserve plays, if you want to say that, by taking quarters and stacking them up on the marquee. So, you could put 3 or 4 quarters up there, and that meant you had the game reserved for that many times. And so I would go into the bowling alley and put my quarters up there and play Karate Champ, and people would come up and challenge me, and it's not like I was undefeatable or anything. Sometimes I got beat, but so I played a lot of Karate Champ, and my friend Justin, the same guy in the last story, also played Karate Champ. He lived in Norman, which is like 45 minutes from me, and in between us was Le Mans. In between us was Malibu Grand Prix, the arcade I mentioned that had the go-kart racing and the big arcade. And so, both of us would play Karate Champ in our hometowns, on our own turf. And then we would meet at Malibu Grand Prix because it was halfway in the middle and play each other. We played lots of games at Malibu, but that was one thing we always did. So, anyway, a few years ago, probably 5 years ago, I saw an eBay auction for Super Mario Brothers, and I contacted the seller, and he said he actually had several games for sale. So I went and met him, and it was one of those deals where the more we talked, the better the deal got, and the more games he was throwing in. So I don't remember what the deal started at, but I ended up with I took home 5 games that day for $500. So I paid $100 a game. So we're going through this collection of games, and he had several games in his garage, and in the back corner I see Karate Champ, and I was like, oh man, I used to play this with my friend all the time. And so I told him I want the Karate Champ, I have to have it, so I pull it out, and I bought it, and I brought it home, and I opened it up to clean it out, and inside, all through the bottom, are a bunch of old tokens, like old arcade tokens. And when I look at them, they're all from Malibu Grand Prix, the Oklahoma City Malibu Grand Prix, which basically means this is the machine that was at Malibu that my friend and I used to play against each other almost 15 years ago. So now we haven't challenged each other since I've owned it, but that challenge is coming, my friends, and I will kick his ass with the front flip back sweep, the spinning heel kick, my famous Karate Champ moves. But anyway, so like I said, I have 30 arcade games, but that's the only game that I've ever found that I could actually trace back to one that I used to play as a kid. So I enjoy that one. When I go out there, and that's like I said about when it comes to collecting, it's not even necessarily the game Karate Champ, although I do enjoy it and I do have those memories associated with it. The memories to me are more important than the game itself, but actually owning the game that my friend and I used to play, that's pretty cool. So, but anyway, that's my Karate Champ. Now, the third story that I wanted to tell you, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. This story doesn't have a name, but it's about the Black Knight pinball. Now, if you've ever, I don't know if you've ever seen the Black Knight. There's actually a sequel to it too, but the original Black Knight was a really popular pinball game, but one of the popular features about it was that I guess they weren't all like this. I thought they were. Everyone I saw was like this, but the Black Knight pinball spoke and had a speech module that it would talk to you during the game, and more importantly, in between games, it would taunt you. Tell you to put in a quarter, or that the Black Knight cannot be defeated, and things like that. So now, when I was 16 years old, I worked at Mazio's Pizza. And right next to the cash register was a small arcade with, I'd say 3 or 4 arcade games and then a pinball table or 2. I remember we had Tetris. We had a sit-down turbo driving game. We had maybe a Miss Pac-Man and a Galaga. And then the pinball machine was the Black Knight. Now, when I was working there, I got promoted to shift manager, and so I one of my jobs was I would close like on a Friday night. Sometime I would lock up, and then Saturday morning I would open. So I would come in, like at 8, in the morning on Saturdays, and there was an older lady that would also come in, and we would open the store and then have it ready, by 11 o'clock or whatever. So, but I had a key to the store. So the other cool thing about Mazio's is that they serve beer, and so there would be 3 or 4 of us there on a Friday night, and we were supposed to be closing, but we would pour ourselves a beer and then play arcade games, So it was like our own little private arcade, our little party place, So we would do that, and we had done this one Friday night, and we had played video games and stuff, and then we left, and apparently I forgot to lock the door. So fortunately for me, Yukon is a pretty small town, and nobody came in the store to rob us overnight. But of course, I didn't know that. So the following morning, I'm supposed to come to work at 8 a.m. and meet this other lady who was probably in her mid-60s, who also worked during the day and on the weekend. And I was running late. We were both supposed to be there at 8, but I was running a little bit late. I got there maybe about 10 after 8. And so when I pulled up to the store, I see her car, which is then surrounded by police cars with their lights on. And the lady is sitting outside on the sidewalk, and the police are talking to her. And so immediately, my mind is racing like, oh my God, what happened, And so I go up there, and so I ask her what happened. And so she retells me the story of how her morning went. This lady arrived at the store around 8 o'clock and came up to the front door, and the front door was unlocked. So that's how we know that I had left the door unlocked on Friday night. Her first instinct was that the store had been broken into and robbed. And the Mazio's, like a lot of restaurants, the lights are all the way in the back. The light switches are in the back of the store. So you have to walk all the way through the store in the dark to get to the back to flip the lights on. So first of all, she's walking through the store in the dark. Second of all, she thinks that there may be a burglar still in the restaurant. So as she's walking through the store, she's walking really slowly. She's scared to death. Right when she gets up to the cash register, which is, of course, next to the arcade, the Black Knight pinball says out loud, "The Black Knight will slay you." She runs out of the store so fast. She runs all the way out the store, down the sidewalk to the payphone, calls 911, tells the police that there's someone in the Black Knight that's about to kill her inside Mazio. So this is why the police have now shown up. So we eventually, after hearing the story, and I'm sure the police figured out that the Black Knight pinball machine was actually not going to kill her or steal anything from the store. So, and then I think I quit Mazio shortly after that. Was asked to resign. So anyway, that's the Black Knight. And you know what? I was only going to tell you 3 stories, but I like that story. I was only going to tell you 3 stories, but I actually have a 4th story that I will tell you real quick. A few years later, when I was probably, I was like 19, I was living in this small apartment, and I was working at Pizza Inn. I worked at a ton of pizza places. And Pizza Inn, I was a shift manager there as well. And Pizza Inn had a few arcade games, and they had a Simpsons pinball machine, which I really liked playing. And I lived in a crappy apartment where I didn't have cable or a phone or anything else. So, after work, I hung out at the pizza place a lot because that was a lot better than hanging out at my house. And so, I would play this, we would close or whatever, and I'd be done by midnight, but I might stay till 1 or 2 in the morning and play pinball. So there was a box up by the cash register that held suckers. And the idea was you could put a quarter in there and then, take a sucker. And from, probably 3 or 4 months that I worked there, from when I started and 3 or 4 months later, there were no suckers in it. But it had, probably $5 or $6 worth of quarters in it. And nobody ever came to get it. And, I asked someone about it one time, and they said, somebody brought it by, and they put suckers in there, and it was for, to help, I think it was for runaways, like to help runaway kids. Like, kids who have run away, and what they really need is $5 worth of quarters. That's going to help them out. So, but nobody ever came back to pick up the money, And so I started taking the quarters out of the box to play pinball because, really, what's one less quarter? How's that going to hurt a homeless kid? It's not. What are they going to do with it? What they do with the quarter? They would come in and play pinball. So I kept this up for a little while, this my little quarter thing, but it didn't take long before I ran out of quarters. There weren't that many quarters in the box. So what I decided to do was I actually started buying suckers at this little convenience store down the street. I would buy bags of suckers and put them in the box, which I was then selling for a quarter under the guise of helping homeless children, and then using the quarters to feed my pinball addiction. I didn't say this was a particularly good story or a particularly nice story, but anyway, so if you were ever homeless and found yourself needing quarters and no one was giving you quarters, then I apologize for my pinball, my quarter ruse that I had going on. But anyway, I'm going to leave you guys with that story, that little upbeat ditty. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up this. I know the show's run a little long, so thanks everybody for tuning in once again to You Don't Know Flack. My email address is robohara@robohara.com. So if you have any comments about the show, any requests for upcoming topics or anything like that, feel free to drop me an email. You can always catch the latest episode at tech.robohara.com. And with that, I'm out of here. So we'll see you on April 15th.